A century ago the sky split because of this full dungeons and monsters appeared. Normal weapons were not able to deal with them. The only ones able to control them were the awakened people with supernatural abilities. These were few select humans who were called awakened. Thanks to their powers skills the troubled world was able to stabilize while civilizations began to take their way. Some awakened became hunters whose job was to fight with the monsters. In 10 years the world was filled with hunters since the mechanism of experts was discovered, so now anyone who had why the Hunter Pro review was created to deal with the problem has limited only to people who had passed an active test for hunters. This gave weight to institutions being created in order to prepare people for set exams, the so-called Hunter Academies. Now we know our protagonist named King, a 27-year-old young man. And naturally awakened. His ability is to have a more powerful force than the rest, but in order to pay the debt of his parents who died in an accident, the young man has been working transporting monsters for the last 9 years. The only thing that motivates him to follow these companions, they ask him how his savings for the academy are going, remembering that currently only those who have passed a famous exam are considered official hunters. In addition to what it is dispensable that it is to attend an academy, since you learn a lot from professional hunters. For his part, our protagonist finally manages to gather what is necessary to study all the damage, despite the fact that it is in a cheap academy. While he is checking his cell phone, an ad from an unknown person appears. Academy, where it is seen how many passed the exam. Thanks to them, the strangest thing is that the teachers had names similar to mythological beings, among them the Monkey King, who shows his registration charges him almost all the money he has, so he stops aside the matter, believing that it is a scam. At the end of his work the protagonist happily retires since he will soon begin his studies, but suddenly a monster that he rebels as the ancient teacher of Odysseus, a hero from Greek mythology mentor, explains that the academy is not for him to choose in which fields he wants to transcend. After finishing the survey, mentor realizes that the protagonist wants to have a spear as his dominant weapon, but for that, he must first be emotionally well, so he recommends taking some courses with the Buddha himself. This is how King does the course that makes him take a tremendous trip. A week later, the recovery of our protagonist is impressive, and that he had only a percentage of the human course and the lower body of a horse. This was the teacher of almost all the heroes of Greek mythology. As a task, the protagonist has to do a routine similar to that of Saitama. Thinking that it is too much, he decides to skip it. But then he realizes that he will not be able to continue any course if he does not complete the task. Without any other option, he gets to work doing all the exercises in the best possible way, because if he did not do it, they would not be counted. The days go by, and the protagonist gets used to the routine. In the news, he sees how a group of hunters defeated a very strong monster. A kind old woman who was his neighbor asks him if he is also a hunter, since she sees him training very often. Who answers that he will soon be one, but is interrupted by a man who tells him that this dream is impossible and that he better. Elsewhere we see a girl who apparently doesn't really like the idea of being a slayer, all this while she kills an incredible amount of monsters. After 2 weeks hospitalized, who finally returns home. Here she realizes she has been the shadow of her grandfather. Due to this, everyone expected him to be like him. When he was older, he founded an academy that soon ran out of students, since everyone thought that his grandfather would teach in that place, which is why he now seeks to have at least one worthwhile student. Returning with our protagonist, he is paralyzed when he sees that the monster that is attacking them is a manticula, a 4-star monster that even professional hunters find difficult to face. In addition to the fact that the only slayer in the place will take a long time to arrive, so King has no choice but to face the monster as it begins to invade him. The protagonist remembers the lessons that Buddha gave him to make us feel afraid in this situation, thus, the battlefield makes him progress more quickly. That's why he needs to enter a hunting academy to get accompaniment for recognizing his grandfather, but the protagonist is indifferent, saying no. In the end, the girl keeps insisting and proposes to join his academy, but the protagonist still does not accept the proposal after so many advantages that he is offered, and the girl ends his attention when he tells her that he will not charge her anything in return. The only thing that he asks is that before the Kazatar exams he attend several competitions in the name of his academy, since he saw a lot of potential in him that way. Here he ends up accepting the proposal. The next day the protagonist meets with Parkin, that he delivers as his temporary license and a new alliance. Both enter a dungeon where Kim has to fight with skills, easily dodging his enemies and eliminating them with a single blow. Excited, he begins to kill everyone he can, since by eliminating them he not only earns points in their courses, but also money that same night, while reviewing all the money he earned in the dungeons, the protagonist plans to enter a paid course to become stronger like the famous Monkey King, but at the time of registering he realizes that it costs him more than 27 million. That is why he better decides to buy some equipment. Among the weapons he finds that they are all mythical objects, so he decides to buy the Spear of Longinus, but it was also very expensive to have 4 levels that can be scaled through the participant having a good performance in the competitions. That is why the academies always send their best students between the events. Points are earned in dungeons and in combats. That is why it prevents fighting against a girl, since the protagonist has never fought against a hunter. The combat begins, and it is quickly noticed the difference in levels, which disappoints the girl a bit, so she decides to end the confrontation with a fast and strong team. It turns out that playing weak was part of her strategy to take her opponent by surprise, which she lets hit like that, but anyway. The young man ends up losing because his experience in combat is very remarkable. In any case, he prevents him from training with the girl, since being a high-ranking one will help him to obtain more experience. He also finds out that if he wins the competition, he will receive money as a prize of around $100,000, exactly what the Spear of Longinus costs. In addition, the tournament will be in 2 weeks, that is why the protagonist he starts training like crazy, and on the day of the tournament a boy with glasses arrives at the place he attends. In the participants' room he wears low-quality things. The boy feels identified with him, so he tries to talk to him. He introduces himself, both talk while a few meters away. Along the way, he repeatedly listens to how the participants are clearly being eliminated by his parents, who had been following him since he considers him a comrade for being in similar situations. The protagonist decides not to pay much attention to him until he finds out that the boy had no parents either. And the only family he had left was his younger sister. They both go through the maze with whom they trust each step they take until they reach a dead end, although it turned out to be a door to the end of the maze. In this way the protagonist is the first to finish the maze, breaking the old record. Finished event. The competitors are surprised that a simple stranger passed the test so quickly on their part. Human Solo says that it was pure beginner's luck. The second event is announced. This will be a one-on-one fight, but at the moment of hearing this most of the participants withdraw for fear of fighting. Leaving only 5 people left in competition. In the armchair public, that is incognito paranormal, hears a lot of fuss in the betting area as it opens to little participants, and that it was expected that they would bet on Jungkong. At that moment a mysterious hoof appears who bets $1 million. For our protagonist the event begins, and in the first round who will fight against a guy named Jumbo, in the second against Lee, and well, this other character will have a rest. The first encounter begins and Dutsu attacks her until she is out of breath, but whoever dodges all the throws so much because the battle is over, so the next fight is about to start. To the bad luck of I, when seeing him, Jungle perceives him as easy prey. The fight starts, and the Redeed attacks mercilessly, leaving Ali on the ground. In a few seconds he regrets being weak, but then he gets up motivated by wanting to be like King. Clearly the battle ends with the boy on the ground, but we do not realize that making him a small angry cut takes it out on the fainted and one attacking fiercely at first, who is intimidated by his strength, but after concentrating manages to connect a blow here, and notes that Laura of the protagonist is not that of a prey, but that of an angry predator, her mana sword, which puts the protagonist in trouble since he has not yet mastered that power. But remember the words of his teacher, as he had to continue fighting even though he could lose. Both are charged with power, and at the moment of impact they create a large cloud of dust that dissipates, reveals a Jungwon on the ground while our protagonist is still standing, winning the fight. In the distance, the girl is surprised how King was able to fill his spear in such a short time. The mysterious subject also he shows surprise to later informs him that he broke multiple rules, so in the end the guy who didn't even fight ended up winning first place. When he remembers the money he lost by not winning the competition, 15 regrets and tells him that he needed it to buy a new spear. In at that moment, Lee arrives to say goodbye and ask him if one day he will be able to be like him by working hard. The protagonist replies that it will be difficult, so that he should not be obsessed with being just a hunter, since he can be good at other things. The boy thanks him, but before leaving, who tells him not to let himself be convinced by anyone to abandon his dreams, and that if he wants to walk. What does Anjun say? That perhaps the boy should have gone to his academy, leaving her thoughtful. Continuing with her business, she tells him that for his effort she will give him a new weapon. That is why they go to a workshop that he usually visits, but the young man decides to take a class to master the mana. Seeing how useful it can be as a first task, they let it manifest 1,000 orbs of mana. Their practice is interrupted by Michu, who is surprised to see how the main character is capable of making mana orbs, which apparently is not usually something easy. In addition to the fact that he is not scared by his intimidating aura, the old man asks him what his goal is with his granddaughter. To the one of the servants he says that the old man he finds himself in his academy, so he flies off on the spot. He does not stop attacking the protagonist, thinking that he is hiding something from him when he sees that talking will not help. Whoever decides to take the opportunity to face the famous saint of the sword, the old man throws a big shot at him. Attack that can barely block, who responds, but it is almost useless. Defeated, the young man manages to fill his spear with his hand and make his attack that barely manages to scratch. When everything is about to end, the girl quickly arrives. The proto hides behind from her and asks why the old man wanted to beat her up. The girl tells her that soon she will explain everything, why grandfather came and scared them. But this time she stands firm before him, telling him that she will not part with Kim. Hearing this is surprising. Remember that a long time ago the girl was orphaned because her father died in a dungeon. That is why he promises to return from her a strong person, the one who takes her granddaughter with the young man. So she begins to feel a little jealous, but not there is time for that because one of his workers tells them that the order, a very important group, requests the presence of the Lord of the Sword, and surprisingly, Kim's, the girl deduces that mysterious subject in the tournament had something to do with Mr. Galia, one of those in charge of the order, predicts that the protagonist will not want to see him, so he proposes to give him $100,000 and agrees later. Mutually attend the meeting while they wait for the mysterious man to appear before our hero. He is surprised, as you know, a man, among other things. The girl reveals that she met him when he participated in the academy competition there. One of his believers saw him and was fascinated with not messing. Luckily with her things calm down, and Ainsel decides to help for the good of the people to verify that it is a sponsorship that will help him in areas that his academy cannot, in addition to the fact that they supposedly do not ask him for anything in return, something that King does not believe at all but tells them that he will think about it if they can see what is on his phone, since if they approach his cell phone they will only think that he has nothing on the screen. The same thing happens with Kilia, who sees absolutely nothing, so the young man decides not to accept the proposal. Later, the girl talks to her subordinate about the distortions in the dungeons too, about how strange King behaved a while ago when he showed him his phone, which causes him a strange feeling, but he doesn't have much time for that since his main concern is in the dungeons coming back with him. Dungeon distortion. The old man explains that this happens when the magical power is altered. As this happens, the difficulty of the dungeon increases, although this type of phenomenon is not common nowadays, which worries the young man, but an engine reassures him, and he retires not without first warning her not to do anything weird with her niece. Back at the academy, who meets her tells her that he found an event for her to earn money. This was the dungeon clearing contest. This type of competition exists because hunters don't want to raid more low-level girls because they don't leave money since they don't have anyone to attack these more girls. These are saturated with monsters, which causes a break in it. Despite the fact that the monsters that come out of that place are of a low level, they are still dangerous. When seeing all the benefits that this competition offers to those who do not hesitate to enter, if I explain the rules to the protagonist, since the event will last, and I will be able to choose what more girls to clean, but you will only have 10 hours to do it, speed being a key, so you need an assistant to pick up the monsters that you eliminate. I raid both coordinate on the most effective route to get from one dungeon to another. This is how the competition starts as soon as they pass monsters, while the young man does push-ups with them. In another part, the element supervisor calmly waits for our protagonist, who arrives at full speed and enters a dungeon full of skeletons to come out with a great loot. After a few minutes later, the team that manages those dungeons check the progress of the participants. There we see how a girl did 16 dungeons, although she was in second place because the first was from our protagonist, who did 32 things that surprised everyone. 16 dungeons. She was talking with the director of the academy and her father that of the competition and the problems too, since Manchal and the young man find out that all the dungeons of there around were already clearly reserved by Delhi work. Now the closest dungeon is an hour away from them. When they decide to go for it, they are also surprised that the same thing happened. For that reason, King's points start to drop. While I am John, he is taking the advantage. The young man thinks of a solution, since if he doesn't fix that he will soon lose the competition. That's why he delays the dismantlement, and he comes up with a plan. The next day we see how Lil's agent pays other hunters to reserve dungeons around our protagonist, but at the moment of doing so they realize that they cheated on the SeoJoon herself, who realizes this when he tries to move on to another dungeon. I made a note to him, surprised that they discovered his plan so quickly, but he tells his daughter to keep it hers since he has another one. Day number 5 of the competition arrives and who meets his rival. This he tells her that it doesn't matter who wins, don't forget that they started with good intentions, something that the girl does not believe since she considers that people only act looking for their own monsters here. She sees that she is doing her exercises while carrying them and asks her what is the reason. He replies that in order to earn money, which bothers him is John, who retires, reaffirming his way of thinking. In another place, he was defeating some level 10 monsters that, to his surprise, were in A solved, but it was not like that. Now the young man's path is interrupted by a first place. Our protagonist's laments since there is not much to do since the competition ends in a few days anyway. The young man continues to strive along with his rival to the point of being in a tie that will be determined in a confrontation where to win the contestant will have to clear 2 of 3 dungeons in the shortest possible time. Both choose which portal to enter, and the competition begins. During their exploration in the dungeon they note that no monster appears. Suddenly he is attacked by a jaw. This monster of 4 stars when the dungeon was 2. The young man comes out of it too. Monster, but before we see a bit of his past it turns out that he already had a brother who dreamed of being a hunter despite the fact that his father wanted him to cheat. He held his ideals of honesty high, which annoyed a girl since she thought everything contrary, but anyway they got along very well until one rainy day she finds out that he died saving a stranger. From that moment on she promises to live a life very different from him, clinging to her father's teachings. We return to deduce that something bad happens at that moment. Remember what he talked to Mixel about the dungeon distortion, so being defeated by the level 10 monster. Luckily the main character appears at the exact moment he tells him to take advantage. The moment to flee she is shocked and asks him why he came to save her, but he doesn't have time to listen to her until he is wounded by one of the monster's horns. John keeps asking what benefit the protagonist is looking for saving her since he seizes the moment to win the competition, who answers that he has no economic interest and that for him there is no better prize than saving a person. These words make the girl remember her brother. The monster appears again to attack. Here the protagonist remembers the lessons of his teachers. They said how important it is to use intuition to combine the senses and in practice this lesson managing to dodge all the attacks of your enemy. Also memorize your pattern of muscular movement. Thanks to that he will be able to hold out until the professional hunters arrive, although apparently the girl is not. That is why the young man decides to finish off the monster as soon as possible from the air. Jinakuma on his spear and attacks with everything he has at despite feeling fear for not being able to win. The attack works in such a way that the monster ends up being split in half with the few forces it has left. Dottie will think of him as his savior in the same way with they try to find out which academy he comes from. For his part Kali Minchus are concerned about the increase in the distortions returning with the protagonist. He is recovering from his injuries, but what hurts him the most is having lost the money from the competition since it was divided in half, and I even plan to make a bet with the girl. Doing rock paper scissors with both hands in that moment follows an appearance to report that Kim actually won all the money. It turns out that the girl withdrew from the competition in addition to having confessed to all the cheating she did with the academy, without counting that now Seon's academy went up to a 3rd place for the equipment that he wanted so much, but when he sees all the items he realizes that none had descriptions about them. Powers that they contained by not knowing which item would be the most suitable. The young man looks for buyer reviews. Luckily, a person had published 100 reviews and personal recommendations about the items. 3 days later we see how he bought many things including the spear of the Longinus. Because of that almost he runs out of money, accompanied by Seon, who goes to a dungeon to test his new weapons, and in the place he has to face a kind of gargoyle which cuts like tofu with his spear, all before the shocking look of his objects. The young man therefore who asks him where he bought them. He answers that in a store near his house, but how is it? Lai also tells him that the owner went on a trip. The conversation is interrupted when a large number of gargoyles appeared then, who asks the girl for permission to try something. That is why he launches himself against the monsters, making use of his teachings, launched a drilling attack that destroys all of them in addition to leaving a huge crack in the dungeon. Later if I tell the young man that Yuman wants to meet him, she was the disciple of a very powerful magician. Even he himself admitted that he had surpassed him. Yes, Anna deduce who surely wants to see it for him. When he sees the protagonist, he is surprised that the famous king is only a boy from high school. Here we discover that June is the sister of who is about 40 years old, but thanks to her magic she can change her appearance. The magician notices the young man's subspace pocket and is super excited for him. mentioning even the smallest detail. That is why she tells him to the protagonist who sells it for 100 billion who thinks about it, but in the end he refuses since the object can only be touched by him because if someone else touches it, electricity passes him. In the end the Maka remains with the protagonist to turn him off from investigating her magic pocket. After so much fuss she knows that the mana magic in the dungeons can be controlled by someone, which would explain the distortions. Listen, all this surprises the magician, who does not stop admiring how particular the young man is after finding out everything she could. The next one who notices that she is not making progress is retiring a lot in the percentage of her courses. That is why she goes for the help of Armchair. She tells him that the only upcoming event is a mock exam for hunters. These are while he was doing his quincentennial lessons that his academy will also do his exam, so he decides to take it as his first test. A huge dragon comes out of his cell phone and he will have to defeat it in just 30 minutes, but due to fear, the dragon realizes that it is false. In the next attempt the young man connects an attack, but it does nothing like that to him. Rest of his confrontations during his break, mentor appears. He is surprised by how much he has progressed in 3 months, even more when he finds out that he was taking the mock exam everything very well, but it turns out that King is not listed as a student at the academy. That is why the mentor leaves to solve it. For his part, he is still uniform because the protagonist will have to participate in the simulated hunter exam. In other matters, he is very concerned with the recruitment of students, since every time a new one arrives, his grandfather appears in attack mode, which he ends up scaring them away. Although that is not one of the biggest problems, but the salary of an instructor academy turns out that the most popular earn more than $1 billion. That is why Animated tells him that he will help him with whatever he needs. 3 days later the boy checks his statistics, where it is seen that he has a great advancement. At that moment it appears to him, although with bad news. It turns out that he reviewed all the information he could but did not found nothing about the protagonist. Basically does not exist in the academy records. However, the boy can still attend all his lectures, which can be explained in the director. Mentor says that the only thing they found was that someone else intervened in that matter. What it means that they did it. Boy telling him that he does not have to worry, since it is a problem that the academy must solve elsewhere. The Prota's free lectures are about to end. That's why mentor gives him some advice on what to do. The study plan is divided into 4 categories: introductory, beginner, intermediate and advanced. Currently the boy is in the introductory stage, and apparently there is a long way to go. Anyway, you are about to enter the beginner level. Here you must choose whether to keep your current weapon or change it. You will also have to turn off your free pass to continue receiving lectures. With all that in mind, the protagonist asks mentor if there are more high-level students, but she answers that she cannot tell him. However, she reveals that the academy operates in 4 dimensions, of which there are 4 with the largest number of students from the Universidad de la Transcendencia. Some time later we arrived at the day of the simulated exam organized by the Huntermal Academy, in which the best academies in the country participate. Each one of them specializes in a subject such as Alex is what do you want, learn GAN magic and the use of weapons, and the hunter's mill, where it goes in those that do not have special characteristics. In the place the protagonist can only think of the billion prize, since apparently for having skipped the line it results that the guy was in the competition to represent a John 3000. That's why he had that kind of preference, since when another student tries to do the same, they don't allow him to pass. They even end up kicking him out later in one of the competitions. We know A Park, a student from the Hunter chain in the 2nd division. He has enough talent to go to Hunter even to the other great academies, however, cannot due to money. Since the boy had no choice but to enter his current academy, where he got a scholarship with the desire to want to improve himself. The result is that the test they are taking consists of 5 subjects. The written exam, we have the physical condition, the use of mana, the combat strength against monsters, raiding dungeons and combat between students. As the first test there was physics, it was about running 3,000 kilometers in 5 minutes. Several times if this was not achieved in the first round the competition was lost. Here we see that Brown and Brute, they are the only ones that have remained. In the next test was of physical strength, where the boy carries more than 600 kilos. As if nothing, all this thanks to his physical training and his magical abilities. This reminds him that he can become stronger if he does the Hercules course, which motivates him even more. He can win the first place. For his part, Kim Kankan finishes tests calmly and then leaves that place, since for students like him, This kind of tests does not represent any challenge, they are only participating to show the status of his academy. In a flashback we see the boy talking to a mysterious guy named who orders to participate in the test exclusively to observe the behavior of the protagonist in the present King Kansas, reviews the results of the physical test finding the first one. The boy did not believe what he was seeing since his opponents were not even recognized students, that is why he calms down thinking that it was just luck and that the next round will be different, although this is not the case because the positions remain the same. Competition number 3, it begins with the use of Manhwa where the students will have to use everything in their way to break a shield. The protagonist will. He shows concern about this test since he still does not fully control that power. Meanwhile Lithium from the Academy Ale makes his demonstration of power by invoking a fireball that completely destroys the shield. This positions her in first place after the grand prize. That's right, as he fills his mana spear and the red one towards the shield, splitting it in half along with the rest of the stage. Because of that he takes the first place from the surprised girl. The protagonist doesn't even know how he got so much power after that the generator the shield broke and the test had to be stopped. There weren't even spare parts anymore. Nobody thought that something like this would happen. After a lot of work the competition resumed, although the boy continued to remain first place in the stands. The public talks about the protagonist recognizing him for solving the case of dungeon deformation. For his part Armchair is very surprised and trusts they are talking about changing the difficulty of the tests since the level of the students is very low. Back with our outbreak he is still very surprised with what just happened. The only thing he knows is that he had a bit of his self from 3 months ago without counting that he is just beginning. This is how by the students of the prestigious academies who are now in the lowest positions. For their part, Pio is happy for the victory of his this partner asks him, does he use all the weapons he has on him? The boy answers yes, since nobody has taught him, he uses a little of everything. Here we are surprised that he was a self-taught student. Despite that, he has the talent to beat others. The students of the prestigious academies. Finally the boy mentions that he has a teacher, although he does not know that he is his student. At that moment a person in charge of the competition among the room to report that there was a terminal. They were heading to the place when listening to this who can hear realizes that it was Hyuri's work. However, this problem jeopardizes the exam. If this happens, the protagonist's victories will be in vain. That's why the boy, he proposes to change the way of carrying out the tests, seeing that the missing part is to measure combat power. He thinks that they can take advantage of it to hold a tournament among students. There would be problems with those who want to participate because if the tournament does not continue the academy organizers would look very bad without more options. The manager accepts happily. Kim Kang gets away with it because now he will have the opportunity to beat the protagonist, even though he is not the only one who thinks like this, since the rest of the prodigies also want to do it for their part. Pio Junjio is very excited and asks him the boy will also participate. He thinks about it, but when he hears that there will be an extra prize, he accepts very quickly. Later the battles are about to begin, and the public is clearly expectant. In the first rounds the prodigies had to win without any problem. Like getting gross, he doesn't like it much because he doesn't see them as a great threat. Although it's easy to predict which one he'll attack you with, it's how he won his first battle here. The protagonist realizes that the boy has a very different way of fighting than the others because he doesn't limit himself in no way more than a fight. It seems that he was in a confrontation, a style of battle that is only obtained with special training. This makes the young man consider the idea that Pioho study in the Transcendental Academy. If we think about it well, when he said that his teacher does not know that he is his disciple, it is because he learned things by watching the videos courses where the instructors do not know who are the students who watch their videos. However, there is a lot of room for doubt after that comes next time. We know a little more about the girl. She is one of the 5 most talented students, the most important magicians. For her nothing is impossible. The fact that she did not stand out much in the test is because it was not favorable for magicians. That is why she decides to change things in battle. But when he casts one of his spells, the protagonist divides it in a single movement, and he didn't even know how he did it. Denied to surrender, the girl says that she will try to find a weak point. This is how she prepares her best attack, a large number of lances of fire that are directed at the protagonist. However, she also ends up dissipating them. she even falls asleep. From how easy it was to obtain victory the next confrontation this Laos vs Shindog the fight begins with both attacking ferociously although movements later ends up nucleating his opponent with a single angry blow. Jim says that the boy cheated by using strange strategies although he only humiliates himself and is seen as a sore loser by his part. King Kang is surprised to realize that Jim Riho did what he did not only for protesting but also for Pyongyo, since his goal was always for both boys to face each other. At that moment the next battle is announced, our protagonist versus King Kang. Here the latter is angry with Jimmy Joe since he feels used by him. For that reason he will change his plans, defeating the boy. The fight begins with giving everything with his sword aura. Even when he hits attacks he breaks part of the blonde deduces that thanks to her he broke the shield generator, that is why he decides to be cautious. The battle continues with the guy launching multiple attacks and the protagonist blocking each one of them. At first the boy is calm, but when he sees that his opponent is serious he also decides. Doing so is how our protagonist releases an intimidating aura while his attacks are stronger. It is as if before it was a soft wave and now the explosion of a large volcano that had been pressing relentlessly now begins to recede. Upon seeing this the guy he realizes that the brute is not even using a power as high as his Padora, but he can still defeat him. This reminds him of when he faced going through this. However, his golden sword ends up breaking. In this way, the boy ends up winning and he advances to the final. This is how the most anticipated confrontation of all our protagonist comes against Lice. The two big surprises of the competition before fighting the main character asks Pio about the matter of his teacher, who maybe he can meet him. At that moment he was about to mention the Transcendental Academy, but then he decides that it is not a good idea because if it turns out not being a student can create a misunderstanding. That's why the Sprout decides to send him some hints, asking if Pio's teacher is a strong man. Clearly he answers yes. Then the boy makes him a proposal. Whoever loses the confrontation must answer the other's questions unconditionally. Both accept and the fight begins, although in the first seconds they remain immobile in a battle position until Pyoho gives the first step. Here the protagonist realizes that his opponent will use his sword, but at any moment he can change weapons. That is why he fights with everything he has. Thanks to Longinus's spear he manages to break the swords, which makes the boy go back to stop, then launch a shower of arrows without any questions about his spear. The battle continues with both attacking at high speed. However, we notice the pious uses strategies that could be considered against the rules. This brings with it some boos from being left behind the others. Here he enters the question if you have ever managed to escape your thoughts and have looked at the world from a slightly different perspective. That is why Buddha tells you a personal anecdote. When he did a training on the ground one day he saw some children competing in a race. For some reason they competed again and again. Each time the same boy came last, but for some reason he never stopped. Smiling full of curiosity, Buddha approached the boy and asked him why was he running. He replied that for fun, also that he does not reach the others because their goal is different. For them the tree is where they want to go, but for the distant future this had set the biggest record in a race. In that carefully back with the protagonist reflects on how he was involved in the pressure of becoming stronger to the point of putting too much pressure on himself. He exerted himself every day and his body became. He developed very fast. That's how he thought he wasn't lagging behind. But the more he did the more anxious he became. That's why the words brush made him realize this and use his old spear, since with the Longinus spear he would win easily, but he wants testing himself in this way. Is how Pio also drops all his weapons, leaving him with only one. And how the fight starts. At the beginning Pio starts launching ferocious attacks. Here the pro says that the boy's technique is to change from attack to defense, so better of himself. In the middle of the battle the place fills with dust, which the protagonist's opponent takes advantage of. Appears to be bustling. Apparently this was his winning movement, so the protagonist decides to fill his spear with mana. At that moment he realizes that he has always used the magic style of his teacher Merlin and not one of his own. As I told him, learning something is wonderful, but when learning becomes a habit or becomes an obstacle to self-expression, that is why from a certain point on, you should not settle for just learning. In this way, it is how the protagonist combines the learning of his instructors, and that is why the protagonist feels the presence of his enemy and manages to stop him clearly without harming him. In another part of Kali, she listens to how the boy won the final as well, how he did it by changing his weapon and using an aura blade, apparently something that was not in the plans. Surprised, The girl says that she was just. He will inform an apostle on the spot this question to the one who solved the dungeon distortion in Korea. When the girl says it was the protagonist, the guy considers this very weird back to the tournament, but he replies that it was just luck. At that moment Junjio Peep appears, which at the end of his work the protagonist happily retires since he will soon begin his studies, but suddenly a monster that he rebels is the ancient teacher of Odysseus, a hero from Greek mythology. Mentor explains that the academy is not for him to choose in which fields he wants to transcend. After finishing the survey, Mentor realizes that the protagonist wants to have a spear as his dominant weapon, but for that, he must first be emotionally well, so he recommends taking some courses with the Buddha himself. This is how King does the course that makes him take a tremendous trip. A week later, the recovery of our protagonist is impressive, and that he had only a percentage of the human course and the lower body of a horse. This was the teacher of almost all the heroes of Greek mythology. As a task, the protagonist has to do a routine similar to that of Saitama. Thinking that it is too much, he decides to skip it. But then he realizes that he will not be able to continue any course if he does not complete the task. Without any other option, he gets to work doing all the exercises in the best possible way, because if he did not do it, they would not be counted. The days go by, and the protagonist gets used to the routine. In the news, he sees how a group of hunters defeated a very strong monster. A kind old woman who was his neighbor asks him if he is also a hunter, since she sees him training very often. Who answers that he will soon be one, but is interrupted by a man who tells him that this dream is impossible and that he better. Elsewhere we see a girl who apparently doesn't really like the idea of being a slayer, all this while she kills an incredible amount of monsters after 2 weeks hospitalized, who finally returns home. Here she realizes she has been the shadow of her grandfather. Due to this, everyone expected him to be like him. When he was older, he founded an academy that soon ran out of students since everyone thought that his grandfather would teach in that place, which is why he now seeks to have at least one worthwhile student. Returning with our protagonist, he is paralyzed when he sees that the monster that is attacking them is a manticula, a 4-star monster that even professional hunters find difficult to face. In addition to the fact that the only slayer in the place will take a long time to arrive, so King has no choice but to face the monster as it begins to invade him. The protagonist remembers the lessons that Buddha gave him to make us feel afraid in this situation, thus, the battlefield makes him progress more quickly. That's why he needs to enter a hunting academy to get accompaniment for recognizing his grandfather, but the protagonist is indifferent, saying no. In the end, the girl keeps insisting and proposes to join his academy, but the protagonist still does not accept the proposal after so many advantages that he is offered, and the girl ends his attention when he tells her that he will not charge her anything in return. The only thing that he asks is that before the Kazator exams he attend several competitions in the name of his academy, since he saw a lot of potential in him that way. Here he ends up accepting the proposal. The next day the protagonist meets with Parkin that he delivers as his temporary license and a new alliance. Both enter a dungeon where Kim has to fight with skills, easily dodging his enemies and eliminating them with a single blow. Excited, he begins to kill everyone he can, since by eliminating them he not only earns points in their courses, but also money. That same night, while reviewing all the money he earned in the dungeons, the protagonist plans to enter a paid course to become stronger like the famous Monkey King. But at the time of registering he realizes that it costs him more than 27 million. That is why he better decides to buy some equipment. Among the weapons he finds that they are all mythical objects, so he decides to buy the Spear of Longinus, but it was also very expensive to have 4 levels that can be scaled through the participant having a good performance in the competitions. That is why the academies always send their best students between the events. Points are earned in dungeons and in combats. That is why it prevents fighting against a girl, since the protagonist has never fought against a hunter. The combat begins, and it is quickly noticed the difference in levels, which disappoints the girl a bit, so she decides to end the confrontation with a fast and strong team. It turns out that playing weak was part of her strategy to take her opponent by surprise, which she lets hit like that, but anyway. The young man ends up losing because his experience in combat is very remarkable. In any case, he prevents him from training with the girl, since being a high-ranking one will help him to obtain more experience. He also finds out that if he wins the competition, he will receive money as a prize of around $100,000, exactly what the Spear of Longinus costs. In addition, The tournament will be in 2 weeks, that is why the protagonist is. He starts training like crazy, and on the day of the tournament a boy with glasses arrives at the place he attends. In the participants' room he wears low-quality things. The boy feels identified with him, so he tries to talk to him. He introduces himself. Both talk while a few meters away. Along the way, he repeatedly listens to how the participants are clearly being eliminated by his parents, who had been following him since he considers him a comrade for being in similar situations. The protagonist decides not to pay much attention to him until he finds out that the boy had no parents either. And the only family he had left was his younger sister. They both go through the maze with whom they trust each step they take until they reach a dead end, although it turned out to be a door to the end of the maze. In this way the protagonist is the first to finish the maze, breaking the old record finished event. The competitors are surprised that a simple stranger passed the test so quickly on their part. Human Solo says that it was pure beginner's luck. The second event is announced. This will be a one-on-one fight, but at the moment of hearing this most of the participants withdraw for fear of fighting Yoonwoo, leaving only 5 people left in competition. In the armchair public that is incognito, Paranormal hears a lot of fuss in the betting area as it opens to little participants, and that it was expected that they would bet on Jungkook. At that moment a mysterious hoof appears who bets $1 million. For our protagonist the event begins, and in the first round who will fight against a guy named Jumbo, in the second against Lee, and well this other character will have a rest. The first encounter begins and Dutsu attacks her until she is out of breath, but whoever dodges all the throws so much because the battle is over, so the next fight is about to start. To the bad luck of I, when seeing him, Jungle perceives him as easy prey. The fight starts, and the Redeed attacks mercilessly, leaving Ali on the ground. In a few seconds he regrets being weak, but then he gets up motivated by wanting to be like King. Clearly the battle ends with the boy on the ground, but we do not realize that making him a small angry cut takes it out on the fainted and one attacking fiercely at first, who is intimidated by his strength, but after concentrating manages to connect a blow here and notes that Laura of the protagonist is not that of a prey, but that of an angry predator, her mana sword, which puts the protagonist in trouble since he has not yet mastered that power. But remember the words of his teacher, as he had to continue fighting even though he could lose. Both are charged with power, and at the moment of impact they create a large cloud of dust that dissipates, reveals a Yoonwon on the ground while our protagonist is still standing, winning the fight. In the distance, the girl is surprised how King was able to fill his spear in such a short time. The mysterious subject also he shows surprise to later informs him that he broke multiple rules, so in the end the guy who didn't even fight ended up winning first place. When he remembers the money he lost by not winning the competition, 15 regrets and tells him that he needed it to buy a new spear. At that moment, Lee arrives to say goodbye and ask him if one day he will be able to be like him by working hard. The protagonist replies that it will be difficult, so that he should not be obsessed with being just a hunter since he can be good at other things. The boy thanks him, but before leaving, who tells him not to let himself be convinced by anyone to abandon his dreams, and that if he wants to walk. What does Anjun say? That perhaps the boy should have gone to his academy, leaving her thoughtful. Continuing with her business, she tells him that for his effort she will give him a new weapon. That is why they go to a workshop that he usually visits, but the young man decides to take a class to master the mana, seeing how useful it can be as a first task. They let it manifest 1,000 orbs of mana. Their practice is interrupted by Michu, who is surprised to see how the main character is capable of making mana orbs, which apparently is not usually something easy. In addition to the fact that he is not scared by his intimidating aura, the old man asks him what his goal is with his granddaughter. To the one of the servants he says that the old man is he finds himself in his academy, so he flies off on the spot. He does not stop attacking the protagonist, thinking that he is hiding something from him when he sees that talking will not help. Whoever decides to take the opportunity to face the famous saint of the sword, the old man throws a big shot at him. Attack that can barely block, who responds, but it is almost useless. Defeated, the young man manages to fill his spear with his hand and make his attack that barely manages to scratch. When everything is about to end, the girl quickly arrives. The proto hides behind from her and asks why the old man wanted to beat her up. The girl tells her that soon she will explain everything, why grandfather came and scared them. But this time she stands firm before him, telling him that she will not part with Kim. Hearing this is surprising. Remember that a long time ago the girl was orphaned because her father died in a dungeon. That is why he promises to return from her a strong person, the one who takes her granddaughter with the young man. So she begins to feel a little jealous, but not there is time for that because one of his workers tells them that the order, a very important group, requests the presence of the Lord of the Sword, and surprisingly, Kim's. The girl deduces that that mysterious subject in the tournament had something to do with Mr. Galia, one of those in charge of the order. predicts that the protagonist will not want to see him, so he proposes to give him $100,000 and agrees later. Mitchell attend the meeting while they wait for the mysterious man to appear before our hero. He is surprised, as you know, a man, among other things. The girl reveals that she met him when he participated in the academy competition there. One of his believers saw him and was fascinated with not messing. Luckily with her things calm down, and Insel decides to help for the good of the people to verify that it is a sponsorship that will help him in areas that his academy cannot, in addition to the fact that they supposedly do not ask him for anything in return. Something that King does not believe at all but tells them that he will think about it if they can see what is on his phone, since if they approach his cell phone they will only think that he has nothing on the screen. The same thing happens with Kilia, who sees absolutely nothing, so the young man decides not to accept the proposal later. The girl talks to her subordinate about the distortions in the dungeons too, about how strange King behaved a while ago when he showed him his phone, which causes him a strange feeling. But he doesn't have much time for that since his main concern is in the dungeons coming back with him. Dungeon distortion. The old man explains that this happens when the magical power is altered. As this happens, the difficulty of the dungeon increases, although this type of phenomenon is not common nowadays, which worries the young man. But an Indian reassures him, and he retires not without first warning her not to do anything weird with her niece. Back at the academy, who meets her tells her that he found an event for her to earn money. This was the dungeon clearing contest. This type of competition exists because hunters don't want to raid more low-level girls because they don't leave money since they don't have anyone to attack these more girls. These are saturated with monsters, which causes a break in it. Despite the fact that the monsters that come out of that place are of a low level, they are still dangerous when seeing all the benefits that this competition offers to those who do not hesitate to enter. If I explain the rules to the protagonist, since the event will last, and I will be able to choose what more girls to clean, but you will only have 10 hours to do it, speed being a key, so you need an assistant to pick up the monsters that you eliminate. I raid both coordinate on the most effective route to get from one dungeon to another. This is how the competition starts as soon as they pass monsters while the young man does push-ups with them. In another part, the element supervisor calmly waits for our protagonist, who arrives at full speed and enters a dungeon full of skeletons to come out with a great loot. After a few minutes later, the team that manages those dungeons check the progress of the participants. There we see how a girl did 16 dungeons, although she was in second place because the first was from our protagonist, who did 32 things that surprised everyone. 16 dungeons. She was talking with the director of the academy and her father that of the competition and the problems too, since Manchal and the young man find out that all the dungeons at there around were already clearly reserved by Delhi work. Now the closest dungeon is an hour away from them. When they decide to go for it, they are also surprised that the same thing happened. For that reason, King's points start to drop. While I am John, he is taking the advantage. The young man thinks of a solution, since if he doesn't fix that he will soon lose the competition. That's why he delays the dismantlement, and he comes up with a plan. The next day we see how Lil's agent pays other hunters to reserve dungeons around our protagonist, but at the moment of doing so they realize that they cheated on the SeoJoon herself, who realizes this when he tries to move on to another dungeon. I made a note to him, surprised that they discovered his plan so quickly, but he tells his daughter to keep it hers since he has another one. Day number 5 of the competition arrives, and who meets his rival. This he tells her that it doesn't matter who wins, don't forget that they started with good intentions, something that the girl does not believe since she considers that people only act looking for their own monsters here. She sees that she is doing her exercises while carrying them and asks her what is the reason. He replies that in order to earn money, which bothers him is John, who retires, reaffirming his way of thinking. In another place, he was defeating some level 10 monsters that, to his surprise, were in A solved, but it was not like that. Now the young man's path is interrupted by A first place. Our protagonist laments since there is not much to do since the competition ends in a few days anyway. The young man continues to strive along with his rival to the point of being in a tie that will be determined in a confrontation where to win the contestant will have to clear 2 of 3 dungeons in the shortest possible time. Both choose which portal to enter, and the competition begins. During their exploration in the dungeon they note that no monster appears. Suddenly he is attacked by a jaw. This monster of 4 stars. When the dungeon was 2, the young man comes out of it too monster, but before we see a bit of his past, it turns out that he already had a brother who dreamed of being a hunter. Despite the fact that his father wanted him to cheat, he held his ideals of honesty high, which annoyed a girl since she thought everything contrary. But anyway, they got along very well until one rainy day she finds out that he died saving a stranger. From that moment on she promises to live a life very different from him, clinging to her father's teachings. We return to deduce that something bad happens at that moment. Remember what he talked to Mixel about the dungeon distortion, so being defeated by the level 10 monster. Luckily the main character appears at the exact moment he tells him to take advantage. The moment to flee, she is shocked and asks him why he came to save her, but he doesn't have time to listen to her until he is wounded by one of the monster's horns. John keeps asking what benefit the protagonist is looking for saving her since he seizes the moment to win the competition, who answers that he has no economic interest and that for him there is no better prize than saving a person. These words make the girl remember her brother. The monster appears again to attack. Here the protagonist remembers the lessons of his teachers. They said how important it is to use intuition to combine the senses and in practice this lesson managing to dodge all the attacks of your enemy. Also memorize your pattern of muscular movement. Thanks to that he will be able to hold out until the professional hunters arrive, although apparently the girl is not. That is why the young man decides to finish off the monster as soon as possible from the air. Jinakuma on his spear and attacks with everything he has at despite feeling fear for not being able to win. The attack works in such a way that the monster ends up being split in half with the few forces it has left. Dottie will think of him as his savior in the same way with they try to find out which academy he comes from. For his part Kali Minchus are concerned about the increase in the distortions returning with the protagonist. He is recovering from his injuries, but what hurts him the most is having lost the money from the competition since it was divided in half, and I even plan to make a bet with the girl. Doing rock paper scissors with both hands in that moment follows an appearance to report that Kim actually won all the money. It turns out that the girl withdrew from the competition in addition to having confessed to all the cheating she did with the academy, without counting that now Seon's academy went up to a third place for the equipment that he wanted so much, but when he sees all the items he realizes that none had descriptions about them. Powers that they contained. By not knowing which item would be the most suitable, the young man looks for buyer reviews. Luckily, a person had published 100 reviews and personal recommendations about the items. 3 days later we see how he bought many things including the spear of the Longinus. Because of that almost he runs out of money, accompanied by Seon, who goes to a dungeon to test his new weapons, and in the place he has to face a kind of gargoyle which cuts like tofu with his spear, all before the shocking look of his objects. The young man therefore who asks him where he bought them. He answers that in a store near his house, but how is it? Lai also tells him that the owner went on a trip. The conversation is interrupted when a large number of gargoyles appeared, then who asks the girl for permission to try something. That is why he launches himself against the monsters, making use of his teachings, launched a drilling attack that destroys all of them in addition to leaving a huge crack in the dungeon. Later if I tell the young man that Yuman wants to meet him, she was the disciple of a very powerful magician. Even he himself admitted that he had surpassed him. Yes, Anna deduce who surely wants to see it for him. When he sees the protagonist, he is surprised that the famous king is only a boy from high school. Here we discover that June is the sister of who is about 40 years old, but thanks to her magic she can change her appearance. The magician notices the young man's subspace pocket and is super excited for him, mentioning even the smallest detail. That is why she tells him to the protagonist, who sells it for 100 billion, who thinks about it, but in the end he refuses since the object can only be touched by him, because if someone else touches it, electricity passes him. In the end the Maka remains with the protagonist to turn him off from investigating her magic pocket. After so much fuss she knows that the mana magic in the dungeons can be controlled by someone, which would explain the distortions. Listen, all this surprises the magician, who does not stop admiring how particular the young man is. After finding out everything she could, the next one who notices that she is not making progress is retiring a lot in the percentage of her courses. That is why she goes for the help of Armchair. She tells him that the only upcoming event is a mock exam for hunters. These are while he was doing his quincentennial lessons that his academy will also do his exam, so he decides to take it as his first test. A huge dragon comes out of his cell phone, and he will have to defeat it in just 30 minutes, but due to fear, the dragon realizes that it is false. In the next attempt the young man connects an attack, but it does nothing like that to him. Rest of his confrontations during his break, mentor appears. He is surprised by how much he has progressed in 3 months, even more when he finds out that he was taking the mock exam everything very well, but it turns out that King is not listed as a student at the academy. That is why the mentor leaves to solve it. For his part, he is still uniform because the protagonist will have to participate in the simulated hunter exam. In other matters, he is very concerned with the recruitment of students since every time a new one arrives, his grandfather appears in attack mode, which he ends up scaring them away, although that is not one of the biggest problems, but the salary of an instructor academy turns out that the most popular earn more than $1 billion. That is why Animated tells him that he will help him with whatever he needs. 3 days later, the boy checks his statistics where it is seen that he has a great advancement. At that moment it appears to him, although with bad news, it turns out that he reviewed all the information he could but did not found nothing about the protagonist, basically does not exist in the academy records. However, the boy can still attend all his lectures, which can be explained in the director mentor says that the only thing they found was that someone else intervened in that matter. What it means that they did it. Boy telling him that he does not have to worry since it is a problem that the academy must solve elsewhere. The Prota's free lectures are about to end. That's why mentor gives him some advice on what to do. The study plan is divided into 4 categories: introductory, beginner, intermediate and advanced. Currently the boy is in the introductory stage and apparently there is a long way to go. Anyway, you are about to enter the beginner level. Here you must choose whether to keep your current weapon or change it. You will also have to turn off your free pass to continue receiving lectures. With all that in mind, the protagonist asks mentor if there are more high-level students, but she answers that she cannot tell him. However, she reveals that the academy operates in 4 dimensions, of which there are 4 with the largest number of students from the university. De la Transcendentia. Some time later we arrived at the day of the simulated exam organized by the Huntermal Academy, in which the best academies in the country participate. Each one of them specializes in a subject such as Alex is what do you want, learn GAN magic and the use of weapons, and the hunter's mill where it goes in those that do not have special characteristics. In the place the protagonist can only think of the billion prize, since apparently for having skipped the line it results that the guy was in the competition to represent a John 3000. That's why he had that kind of preference, since when another student tries to do the same, they don't allow him to pass, they even end up kicking him out later in one of the competitions. We know A. Park, a student from the Hunter chain in the 2nd division. He has enough talent to go to Hunter even to the other great academies, however, cannot due to money. Since the boy had no choice but to enter his current academy where he got a scholarship with the desire to want to improve himself. The result is that the test they are taking consists of 5 subjects. The written exam, we have the physical condition, the use of mana, the combat strength against monsters, raiding dungeons and combat between students. As the first test there was physics, it was about running 3,000 kilometers in 5 minutes. Several times if this was not achieved in the first round the competition was lost. Here we see that Brown and Brute, they are the only ones that have remained in the next test was of physical strength where the boy carries more than 600 kilos. As if nothing, all this thanks to his physical training and his magical abilities. This reminds him that he can become stronger if he does the Hercules course, which motivates him even more. He can win the first place. For his part, Kim Kankan finishes tests calmly and then leaves that place, since for students like him, this kind of tests does not represent any challenge. They are only participating to show the status of his academy. In a flashback we see the boy talking to a mysterious guy named who orders to participate in the test exclusively to observe the behavior of the protagonist in the present King Kansas. Reviews the results of the physical test, finding the first one the boy did not believe what he was seeing since his opponents were not even recognized students. That is why he calms down thinking that it was just luck and that the next round will be different, although this is not the case because the positions remain the same. Competition number 3, it begins with the use of mana where the students will have to use everything in their way to break a shield. The protagonist will. He shows concern about this test since he still does not fully control that power. Meanwhile, Litlium from the Academy Ale makes his demonstration of power by invoking a fireball that completely destroys the shield. This positions her in first place after the grand prize. That's right, as he fills his mana spear and the red one towards the shield, splitting it in half along with the rest of the stage. Because of that he takes the first place from the surprised girl. The protagonist doesn't even know how he got so much power after that the generator, the shield broke and the test had to be stopped. There weren't even spare parts anymore. Nobody thought that something like this would happen. After a lot of work the competition resumed, although the boy continued to remain first place in the stands. The public talks about the protagonist recognizing him for solving the case of dungeon deformation. For his part, Armchair is very surprised and trusts they are talking about changing the difficulty of the tests since the level of the students is very low. Back with our outbreak he is still very surprised with what just happened. The only thing he knows is that he had a bit of his self from 3 months ago, without counting that he is just just beginning. This is how, by the students of the prestigious academies who are now in the lowest positions. For their part, Pio is happy for the victory of his. This partner asks him, does he use all the weapons he has on him? The boy answers yes, since nobody has taught him, he uses a little of everything. Here we are surprised that he was a self-taught student. Despite that, he has the talent to beat others. The students of the prestigious academies. Finally, the boy mentions that he has a teacher, although he does not know that he is his student. At that moment, a person in charge of the competition among the room to report that there was a terminal. They were heading to the place when listening to this who can hear realizes that it was Hyuri's work. However, this problem jeopardizes the exam. If this happens, the protagonist's victories will be in vain. That's why the boy, he proposes to change the way of carrying out the tests, seeing that the missing part is to measure combat power. He thinks that they can take advantage of it to hold a tournament among students. There would be problems with those who want to participate, because if the tournament does not continue, the academy organizers would look very bad without more options. The manager accepts happily. Kim Kang gets away with it because now he will have the opportunity to beat the protagonist, even though he is not the only one who thinks like this, since the rest of the prodigies also want to do it for their part. Pio Junjio is very excited and asks him. The boy will also participate. He thinks about it, but when he hears that there will be an extra prize, he accepts very quickly. Later, the battles are about to begin, and the public is clearly expectant. In the first rounds, the prodigies had to win without any problem. Like getting gross, he doesn't like it much because he doesn't see them as a great threat. Although it's easy to predict which one he'll attack you with, it's how he won his first battle here. The protagonist realizes that the boy has a very different way of fighting than the others because he doesn't limit himself in no way more than a fight. It seems that he was in a confrontation, a style of battle that is only obtained with special training. This makes the young man consider the idea that Pioho study in the Transcendental Academy. If we think about it well, when he said that his teacher does not know that he is his disciple, it is because he learned things by watching the videos. Courses where the instructors do not know who are the students who watch their videos. However, there is a lot of room for doubt. After that comes next time. We know a little more about the girl. She is one of the 5 most talented students, the most important magicians. For her, nothing is impossible. The fact that she did not stand out much in the test is because it was not favorable for magicians. That is why she decides to change things in battle. But when he casts one of his spells, the protagonist divides it in a single movement, and he didn't even know how he did it. Denied to surrender, the girl says that she will try to find a weak point. This is how she prepares her best attack, a large number of lances of fire that are directed at the protagonist. However, she also ends up dissipating them. She even falls asleep from how easy it was to obtain victory. The next confrontation, this Laos versus Shindog. The fight begins with both attacking ferociously, although movements later ends up nucleating his opponent with a single angry blow. Jim says that the boy cheated by using strange strategies, although he only humiliates himself and is seen as a sore loser by his part. King Kang is surprised to realize that Jim Riho did what he did not only for protesting but also for Pyongyo, since his goal was always for both boys to face each other. At that moment, the next battle is announced, our protagonist versus King Kang. Here the latter is angry with Jimmy Joe since he feels used by him. For that reason, he will change his plans, defeating the boy. The fight begins with giving everything with his sword aura. Even when he hits attacks, he breaks part of the blonde. Deduces that thanks to her he broke the shield generator. That is why he decides to be cautious. The battle continues with the guy launching multiple attacks and the protagonist blocking each one of them. At first, the boy is calm, but when he sees that his opponent is serious, he also decides. Doing so is how our protagonist releases an intimidating aura while his attacks are stronger. It is as if before it was a soft wave, and now the explosion of a large volcano that had been pressing relentlessly now begins to recede. Upon seeing this, the guy, he realizes that the brute is not even using a power as high as his Fedora, but he can still defeat him. This reminds him of when he faced going through this. However, his golden sword ends up breaking. In this way, the boy ends up winning and he advances to the final. This is how the most anticipated confrontation of all our protagonist comes against Lice. The 2 big surprises of the competition before fighting the main character asks Pio about the matter of his teacher, who maybe he can meet him. At that moment, he was about to mention the Transcendental Academy, but then he decides that it is not a good idea because if it turns out not being a student can create a misunderstanding. That's why the Sprout decides to send him some hints, asking if Pio's teacher is a strong man. Clearly he answers yes. Then the boy makes him a proposal. Whoever loses the confrontation must answer the other's questions unconditionally. Both accept and the fight begins, although in the first seconds they remain immobile in a battle position until Pyoho gives the first step. Here the protagonist realizes that his opponent will use his sword, but at any moment he can change weapons. That is why he fights with everything he has. Thanks to Longinus's spear he manages to break the swords, which makes the boy go back to stop, then launch a shower of arrows without any questions about his spear. The battle continues with both attacking at high speed. However, we notice the pious uses strategies that could be considered against the rules. This brings with it some boos from being left behind the others. Here he enters the question if you have ever managed to escape your thoughts and have looked at the world from a slightly different perspective. That is why Buddha tells you a personal anecdote. When he did a training on the ground one day, he saw some children competing in a race. For some reason, they competed again and again. Each time the same boy came last, but for some reason he never stopped. Smiling full of curiosity, Buddha approached the boy and asked him why was he running. He replied that for fun, also that he does not reach the others because their goal is different. For them the tree is where they want to go, but for the distant future this had set the biggest record in a race in that. Carefully back with the protagonist reflects on how he was involved in the pressure of becoming stronger to the point of putting too much pressure on himself. He exerted himself every day and his body became. He developed very fast. That's how he thought he wasn't lagging behind. But the more he did, the more anxious he became. That's why the words brush made him realize this and use his old spear, since with the Longinus spear he would win easily. But he wants testing himself, and this way is how Pyo also drops all his weapons, leaving him with only one. And how the fight starts. At the beginning, Pyo starts launching ferocious attacks. Here the pro says that the boy's technique is to change from attack to defense, so better of himself. In the middle of the battle the place fills with dust, which the protagonist's opponent takes advantage of. Appears to be bustling. Apparently this was his winning movement, so the protagonist decides to fill his spear with mana. At that moment he realizes that he has always used the magic style of his teacher Merlin and not one of his own. As I told him, learning something is wonderful, but when learning becomes a habit or becomes an obstacle to self-expression, that is why from a certain point on, you should not settle for just learning. In this way, it is how the protagonist combines the learning of his instructors, and that is why the protagonist feels the presence of his enemy and manages to stop him clearly without harming him. In another part of Kali, she listens to how the boy won the final as well, how he did it by changing his weapon and using an aura blade, apparently something that was not in the plans. Surprised, the girl says that she was just. He will inform an apostle on the spot this question to the one who solved the dungeon distortion in Korea. When the girl says it was the protagonist, the guy considers this very weird. Back to the tournament, but he replies that it was just luck. At that moment Junji Peep appears, which